Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 69 of the Memorial Memo KSR's Kentucky Women's Basketball Podcast. We originally planned to do this episode, I want to say it was Thursday, sometime last week. I think it was Thursday and not for certain, maybe been Friday. Just had some things pop up, had to put this on the back burner, but I actually think it kind of worked out because alongside the Jemma Amoore news, we have some AD news and some more things to talk about. Savvy Swords balling out for Canada. We're going to get to all of that. Just wanted to thank you all for some grace. Had some people ask, hey, I know you posted about an episode coming. Where is it? And I'm like, well, we had to put it on the back burner, and we're here on Monday doing it now. So we'll start with Jemma Amoore, who, I had kind of heard, I think it was about this time last week or so, like, hey, Kentucky's going to add someone, and here's the name. And I think I put it on KS Board. It's obviously a fun connection because Jemma Amoore is Georgia Amoore's sister. Now, obviously, when you kind of hear that Kentucky's getting an Amoore, I think your brain wants to immediately go to like, oh, we have an All-American point guard again. That's not quite what Jemma's going to be, or at least I don't think so, right? She started her career at Sacramento State, played sparingly there, and then got some more playing time IU Indy. Last year, the Jaguars, not the Indiana Hoosiers, the IU Indy Jaguars. She got some more playing time there, but didn't really play, a whole lot there either. So, I think at the end of the day, getting Jemma Amoore, number one, it's kind of a good cultural get, keeps the family aspect that Kenny's such a big fan of, such a big proponent of, keeps that going. But, I know, like Claire Strack, Gabby Brooks, a lot of the Virginia Tech people, they're close with Jemma, obviously, so I think that's good. But I wouldn't expect her to be, the difference maker in a national championship or anything like that. 1.7 points per game at IU Indy. This is really more so just, again, keeping it within the family, but also, I do think it's fair to say, I think about a couple of years ago, really since Kenny's gotten here, the main complaint is always about, why are we not using all 15 roster spots? Like, we need depth. Now, obviously, when you say, hey, Phoenix, we need depth, why do you not have it? You're obviously meaning like depth as in like quality contributors off the bench. And I think maybe with an off season at Kentucky, and she'll be a junior, so she'll be have 2 years of eligibility at least. I think, maybe Jemma could blossom into into something, but, I think more than anything right now, she is, PG4 almost. With Madden Greenway, I think, being the starter. And personally, I see Asia Boone doing what she did last season and kind of playing backup point guard, and I figured maybe even Deanna Collins could do that as well, and in that case would be ahead of Jemma on the depth chart. But, Georgia Amoore was a really fun personality to have around in Lexington, and at the very least, that is what Jemma will provide. So, again, I'm not saying she is the next Georgia Amoore or anything like that, but, a little bit of depth and, again, good culture to have on the team. Now, the most recent development, most recent news we have for not just Kentucky women's basketball, but the entirety of UK athletics, that Kentucky has hired Jason J. Batt, I should say. I remember when I saw the initial report of J. Batt, and I'm like, surely that's a typo, right? Like someone meant to put, maybe J-A-Y or, like a full name, and I go look it up, and it's like, oh, okay, people just call this guy J for whatever reason. So J. Batt, hired as Kentucky's new athletic director, comes from Michigan State, also the CEO of Champions Blue, which is basically just Kentucky's in-house NIL, all that stuff. J. Batt comes from a background of fundraising. He went to North Carolina as a soccer player, won a national title there, and immediately got into, working in the athletic department space. He was a grad assistant at North Carolina for a year, and then immediately went off and running with, the fundraising roles and fundraising jobs, starting at William and Mary in 2005 through 2007. And then the point to make for this women's basketball team and Kenny Brooks and the whole kind of, connecting theme here for the women's team specifically is that from 2007 to 2009, Jay Batt was the director of major gifts for athletics. So basically just a non-AD fundraising role at James Madison, again from 2007 to 2009, while Kenny Brooks was head coach there. And then he, of course, after James Madison, kind of got his first real big-time job, was named the executive director of the Terrapin Club in Maryland, his first Power 4, at the time, Power 5 job. He was there for 4 years, and then he became an associate AD at East Carolina before taking on the big fundraising role at Alabama. And then he has 4 years of AD experience coming from Georgia Tech and most recently Michigan State. Now, you ask yourself, Phoenix, what does Jay Batt mean for Kentucky women's basketball, right? People are going to talk about men's basketball and football, but for the Memorial Memo, a Kentucky women's basketball podcast, what does Jay Batt mean for Kentucky women's basketball? So, obviously, there's already the connection to Kenny Brooks and James Madison when they worked together there. I talked to, not like Kenny himself or anything yet, at least, but just some people who would know Kenny better than me, would know maybe the whole situation as a whole better. And I think people think Jay Batt can be good for Kentucky women's basketball. There's some kind of talk that, he is definitely a football-first guy, but when you're at Kentucky, it's a different, there's an exception to the rule with Kentucky where you have to make sure men's basketball at least stays afloat, and I think kind of a byproduct of that women's basketball would be there as well. And I want to talk about specifically, because we already hinted, the part where he was at James Madison with Kenny, but just specifically his time as AD. So at Georgia Tech, when he was the AD, Georgia Tech was not really ever that great. They did get more money, more NIL. Obviously, that's kind of when NIL really started to boom, is when he was the AD there. But in 24-25, I think that was his last season there as the AD. They went 22-11, made the first round of the tournament. If you remember, that was the team where Tony Morgan was actually the point guard, and they started the year 15-0. And so they had some good pieces there. I think kind of the ACC just kind of got them, right? And then ran into a really underrated Richmond team. But I kind of went back and looked. Every year under him, under Jay Batt, Georgia Tech did get better. They were like a sub-500 team. I think they were close to 500. And then I want to say they went 17-16. And then, under Jay Batt, 22-11. Okay? But then this past season, while he was in Michigan State, the Spartans went 23-9, made the second round of the NCAA tournament before losing to Oklahoma, and they finished the year ranked number 22 in the country. And of course, today there's this big thing about Tom Izzo on the men's side not being very happy about Jay Batt leaving Michigan State, and back to the women's side, clearly Michigan State's done good enough because their head coach is one of the assistants on the FIBA U18 AmeriCup roster on the women's side, and we'll get to that more in a minute. But all this goes to say that, Jay Batt, heavy on football, I think there's the quote that, you have to have football in order for your whole athletic department to succeed. It's basically what he said. I think, with that in mind, I think we can feel pretty good about Jay Batt making sure Kentucky women's basketball stays afloat, especially with the previous work history with Kenny Brooks. I think it'll be interesting And as Captain Crush says, if Izzo is mad that he's leaving, I think that's a good omen. And I think you're right about that. You think about how Tom Izzo he's been there for almost 30 years or so, won the national championship back in, I believe, was it 2000? Yeah, back in 2000 at Michigan State. He's been there. He's kind of the spokesman almost of the athletic department there. And he was distraught. I encourage you to go find the video for yourself if you haven't. But, again, I think there are a lot of reasons that point that J. Batt, should be a good AD for football. Obviously, I think that's pretty clear. Men's basketball, Kentucky, again, is this exception to the rule kind of program where you have to make sure that's good, because if it's not, you'll be gone. Football can go 10-2, but if basketball's winning sub 20 games every year, or hell, even at Kentucky, if you win 22, 23 games, but you get bounced in the first round every year, you're gone, right? So you have to make sure men's basketball's good. And I think, again, because of the Kenny Brooks history, because of his history in women's basketball, which has gotten progressively better over the years, I think he should be a pretty good hire. But at the end of the day, we'll kind of just have to wait and see what he does. But from the fundraising aspect, the NIL for the women's program should be, I think, better than it even has been. And, of course, I think that can be exciting. Want to give a quick shout to our friends over at Rollback for sponsoring today's episode. You listening can change the game with Rollback, a proud partner of KSR. Get the best fit and the best feel with their incredibly comfortable activewear. From polos and quarter zips to shorts and Delta performance pants, you will look good and feel good with Rollback. Use promo code KSR for 20% off your purchase. What did I just say? 20% off your first purchase at rollback.com. Leave it to me to mess up the ad read. Now, some more news, some more interesting things to talk about. Stuff just keeps popping up. This is starting to be the point in the summer where we finally have something going on again, right? Thank God for UK baseball going on for as long as it did, even though it was a bit shorter than we wanted it to, because, man, when the season ends, like when the basketball season ends, like May is the worst month ever. Like May is the most boring. What happens in May? I don't know. Mother's Day. But other than that, like there's nothing positive to say about the month of May. The weather kind of starts to suck. It's just the month of May, it's boring and there's no news. We finally are starting to get some again. According to the Lexington Herald-Leader, right, they did an open records request with Kentucky and found out some non-conference games for Kentucky, and we'll get to some of those in a second. But it sounds like Kentucky will be playing in a Thanksgiving MTE, a multiple-team event, if you don't know what that means. Basically, it sounds like Kentucky could be in a Thanksgiving tournament or just a classic, right? I actually don't know totally how this goes. It kind of gives off more of a classic feel, so we'll just go ahead and look, huh? So this event, which, by the way, is called the Coast to Coast Women's Basketball 2026 Daytona Beach Classic. So again, I don't think it's tournament style, but I don't totally know. But this event will send Kentucky to Florida, where UK is guaranteed 2 D1 games. And that's what the Herald-Leader wrote, specifically Caroline Makauskas, who admittedly does a very good job at the Herald-Leader, covering women's basketball and now men's basketball and football. Now, she wrote that Coast to Coast also hosted the Music City Classic in Nashville in 2024 during Brooks' inaugural season. That's when Kentucky played Illinois and Arizona State, winning those 2 games. The other Daytona Beach Classic opponents are currently unknown, but Kentucky is paying $55,000 and any associated travel, food, or other team costs in order to participate. Coast to Coast will provide up to 15 rooms per night for 3 nights, as well as an upgraded suite for Brooks. So a lot of like extra stuff about travel pay, all the stuff that was available in the contract language. But the main thing we know, Kentucky will be playing in the Coast to Coast Women's Basketball 2026 Daytona Beach Classic. Again, a Thanksgiving weekend MTE, and we don't know exactly who the opponents are yet. We do know there will be 2 D1 games, though. So, I don't know if this will be more like the Music City Classic where, you play 2 Power 4 teams and they're good, or if you're just going to be beating up on sneaky teams, kind of like the BVN Invitational on the men's side. But I just think it's interesting that, I think it's fun that Kentucky will be in this. We'll just have to see who the opponents are. This could end up being a gigantic nothing burger, right? I guess we don't know. But the Herald Leader did point out some more games as well. All of these that I'm about to say are home games, and the dates and times. Actually, the dates can change because they're technically not finalized, and then game times and TV designations would obviously be at a later date as well. But according to the Lexington Herald Leader, here are the majority of Kentucky's non-conference games. So as well as the Daytona Beach Classic, Thanksgiving weekend, November 2nd, which would be the season opener, surely the season opener against Morehead State again. 3 days later, on November 5th, Kentucky would take on Northern Kentucky. They also played Northern Kentucky in Kenny's first season here. And then November 11th would be against Evansville. November 20th would be against Marshall. That is the second part of a home-and-home series. Kentucky played at Marshall last season and won very handily. And December 6th against Bellarmine. And December 28th against Kent State. So those are some extra home games for Kentucky. Again, like those are your cupcakes, right? Kentucky should win those, obviously, but we're starting to finally get a feel of the schedule. You have the Daytona Beach Classic, those non-conference games, and the rosters coming together. Everything's starting to kind of take shape for this next season. But also, what I also found interesting is that Kentucky has 2 games, at least as of right now, 2 games in Rupp Arena next season. Kentucky last played in Rupp, Kyra Elsie's last year, which was my first year on the beat, when every game was at Rupp Arena. Every home game was at Rupp Arena, just about. They had, I want to say, 1 at Georgetown College and 1 at Transy as well. But the majority of those home games were at Rupp Arena. Kentucky hasn't been back to Rupp since. Looks like that'll be happening twice this season. First, you have Kentucky taking on Clemson and the ACC SEC Challenge on Thursday, December 3rd, and then Louisville Wednesday, December 9th. Now, I think one reason why the Clemson game is at Rupp Arena, a few people kind of told me, like, hey, I think the women's the women's volleyball NCAA tournament might come through Lexington that weekend or during that time. So that might be why, the Clemson games at Rupp Arena. Obviously, the volleyball team, really good. You could expect them to host in the NCAA tournament. And, I'm assuming there is a working thought that, let's have this game in Rupp Arena because Kentucky volleyball could be hosting in Memorial Coliseum, which sucks because the fan bases for volleyball and women's basketball definitely go hand in hand. All of the teams in Memorial, the women's basketball team, volleyball, stunt, gymnastics, they all kind of go hand in hand. So it kind of sucks those 2 things would be happening at the same time. But again, Kentucky hosting a pretty good Clemson team in the ACC SEC Challenge Thursday, December 3rd in Rupp Arena. Sean Poppy, their head coach, was actually an assistant under Kenny at Virginia Tech for some years. And then, of course, the Louisville game Wednesday, December 9th. That should be fun. I don't think, now obviously there may be since there is with the Clemson game, but I don't think there's anything sitting there really conflicting the Louisville game as far as like another tournament or something going on. But that should be really fun, and I'm kind of curious myself just to see what the crowds look like for those games because, like with Clemson, that might be a smaller crowd. Obviously, it's not a rivalry game. If the whole volleyball thing happens, it would definitely be more than the 500 and that's pushing it, that were there for the Kyrie Elsie games. But, I don't know if I'm expecting 22,000 people or whatever the capacity is now. I don't know if I'm expecting that many people to be there. But I would say it should be exciting. Both games should be exciting. Louisville should be in my opinion, top 10 team this year. And Clemson should be pretty good too. So those would be good games to go watch. And all in all, I'm just really excited for them. And again, it'll be good to see Kentucky get back in Rupp, just to see now with Kenny Brooks, how much can you fill up the place, especially for that Louisville rivalry game. Now, let's talk about a current Kentucky Wildcat incoming freshman. Savvy Swords is currently playing for Canada in the FIBA U18 Amoore Cup. She is absolutely hooping it out. By the way, tonight, Savvy Swords in Canada will take on USA in the final. That's tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's on YouTube. So, I highly encourage you all to watch that. My eyeballs will certainly be on that game, because you have Savvy Swords and Canada versus the USA, and USA also has some Kentucky targets, which we'll also get into. But Savvy, she, I talked to some recruiting people not that long ago, and they follow me on Twitter, and they kind of know me. And, like one of them, there's one guy I talked to, and he goes, Phoenix, I don't know what you're doing, man, but you do not talk about Savvy Swords enough. You do not appreciate Savvy Swords that I think you should. You ever seen Sila? Do you know who Sila Swords is? And of course, that's her sister, plays in Michigan. And I'm like, well, of course I know Sila Swords. And she's like, well, Savvy's probably going to end up being better at some point. And, they basically were just hammering me like, Phoenix, you talk about Madden Greenway all the time. You've talked about Emily McDonald being a great shooter. You don't talk about Savvy enough. And I can kind of see why here in this FIBA Amoore Cup tournament. She is first on Canada with 17.3 points per game, and she's also first on the team with 8.3 rebounds per game. She is second on the team with 4.5 assists per game, which I also think might be top 10 in the entire tournament. But her 8.3 rebounds per game, that's fourth in the tournament. Her points per game is third in the whole tournament. And I kind of digged a little bit further, right? You could see she's third in the tournament in field goal percentage, 53.2%. But the thing I really appreciated, she ranks first, Savvy does, in this entire FIBA U18 Amoore Cup tournament in PER, player efficiency rating. She has a 23.8 efficiency rating, which is first in the entire tournament. Of all the players and elite high prospects there are in the players, she's first in the entire tournament with a 23.8 PER. Across the 4 games that she's played, she has scored 17 points, 19 points, 18 points, 15 points. The rebounds are pretty high up there. And the thing with her, especially against the Dominican Republic, for example, she went 2 of 5 from 3. Against Venezuela, 2 of 3 from beyond the arc. So she can extend her range and score. I've seen this where she is kind of almost an inside scorer, right? Like this high motor, I can score on you in the paint a little bit, but she even she can shoot it, right? And I think that's really exciting. Savvy has literally been the leader of this Canada team. I've watched bits and pieces of the games by now, and it's fun because obviously I think you have to give a little bit small asterisk to it because she's a class above a lot of these kids, but Jordan Wheeler is another really good kid for Canada. She is clearly the best team on Canada's team, and they're playing in the final tonight against USA. Now, speaking of USA, they have some Kentucky targets. We'll start with Sydney Savory, who personally I believe is Kentucky's biggest target. Just kind of talking to people, and I think I've given this update a couple times, I haven't checked in on Sydney since this event started or anything, But I know Michigan is the home state school in her recruitment. They've been big on her for a while. UCLA's been on her for a while. And then you have like Texas and UConn who are hopping into the recruitment now. I think South Carolina offered her too. So 5-star top 10 kid, averaging 6.8 points per game, 3.5 rebounds per game. In the event, scored 15 points against Argentina. Halen Ayers, another Kentucky target in the 2027 recruiting class, having 8.5 points per game, 3.8 rebounds per game, and then 3 assists per game, which I think is like 10th in the tournament. Had 10 points and 14 points in the event. Ryan Carter is another one who Kentucky's keeping an eye on, 5 points per game. She had 8, 6, and 3. 3 blocks, that is, against Paraguay. Jordan Palmer's probably been the best Kentucky target of the event. 17.5 points per game, which is second in the tournament. 6 rebounds, 4 steals per game, which is first in the tournament. And then she's shooting 69% from the field, which is first in the tournament. See, unlike, Sydney Savory or some of these other kids, Jordan doesn't really shoot threes. So that's why her field goal percentages are so high. And honestly, kind of leads me to be a little skeptical of how good she'll really be because, yes, she is an efficient scorer. But, I just... It's tough because it almost... she's not Audie Crooks. But it reminds me of her in that way of, you're putting up good numbers, but it's all inside and it feels one-dimensional to a degree, but she can at least defend, unlike Audie. 16 points, 7 steals, 6 rebounds against Argentina, 24 points, 10 rebounds against Mexico, and then 21 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 steals against Paraguay. And then the 2028 class, Sydney Douglas is averaging 6 points and 4.5 rebounds per game. Her best outing was against Venezuela. She had 11 points and 7 rebounds. So, again, like these Kentucky targets are obviously some playing better than others. But clearly Kenny Brooks is going after the best of the best in the class, right? 2027 primarily, that is. And at the end of the day, I think above all else, it's just really good to see our girl Savvy Swords balling out. Because, as soon as she finishes the AmeriCup, she's coming to UK, I imagine. Deanna Collins just arrived on campus, and I believe Asia Boone is still on campus. So I know that's 2 that you have. Gabby lives in Lexington with her family, I would assume. So, I don't think she's gone anywhere. But, things are starting to come together as far as that goes. But Savvy Swords, just a really impressive prospect. And, again, everyone that I've talked to, especially that one person, is like, hey, man, you're not appreciating Savvy enough, and we can really kind of start to see why here in this AmeriCup tournament. One of the next things I want to talk about, after Kentucky got Jemma Amoore, okay, because, again, I said this, I think, before, every time I think Kenny Brooks is done with the roster, like this year's roster, every time I think he's done, no, we have someone else. And that's the case again. Now, I was specifically told, hey, Phoenix, it'll probably be one more. Like, we think it'll be one more. Okay? So, again, I think this is a note of... Now, unlike Jemma, right, when I asked about Jemma, like, Jemma was already pretty much a done deal to UK. I think Kenny is still looking to add one more. He doesn't have that set in stone yet. But... Again, my guess is, this is an international player, and I would think they play in the post, just kind of looking at the roster. Because now that you've added Jemma, I think there are 100 guards on the team. So, it'll be good to go out and get a forward or a center if that's what it is. But I would assume it's the international route. Because if it's not the international route, it's going to be someone that's not playing regardless, because there aren't really anyone, like any good kids left in the portal that I know of. So, like, all the high-profile players obviously found their new homes. So, I think with this one, Kenny Brooks is still looking to add one more player to the roster and looking to have the most depth he has ever had, not only at Kentucky, but quite literally ever, because even at Virginia Tech, he kind of kept a short rotation, and it's just a different beast here at Kentucky than it is obviously at James Madison. So, we could be looking at the most talented, most deep roster Kentucky has maybe ever had. And that, of course, is exciting, but I do believe, just based on some conversations I've had, that Kentucky is looking to add one more player to its roster. Now, I want to begin to wrap up the episode with some questions and some comments from you all. We did this last time we recorded. Basically, if you were not watching live, right, or if you're watching live, go ahead, feel free to send in some questions or comments. But if you're not watching live, feel free to go to the comment section, leave us a comment or question to be read on next episode. This was very successful before, and it has been a success this episode as well. We start with a point from Dave Sloan, who says, in my opinion, Claire Strack playing the 4 will make a load of difference for this year. Her numbers should be even better. Now, the interesting point here is that I obviously don't expect Clara Strack to primarily be a 4, right? I think she'll primarily still be the 5 with Maisie O'Neal at the 4. But, and that's a but, obviously, I think this roster and the way it has been built would allow for Kenny to do some more mix and matching, especially if this one player he might go and add could be, let's a la like Clara Silva, right? Like a really tall post who can actually give you meaningful minutes. If that's what's in the fold, then she, Clara Strack would definitely get some minutes at the 4. But even then, this roster is there's so many pieces to the roster, she could get minutes at the 4. And, her numbers, you say her numbers should be even better. I think they should be even better, even, regardless of she's playing minutes at the 4 or not. But, we saw, especially towards the end of the year, like, I think it was against Georgia in the SEC tournament where she hit 5 threes. Like, she can really step out and hit shots. It's not the strength of her game. It's not what Claire Strack's best at. But she can go do it. And so, yeah, if she gets minutes at the 4, I think it could make a difference in terms of what this team looks like. If I'm Coach Yo or Vic Schaefer or whoever, Tammy Rees now at Florida, whatever SEC coach you want to say, if I sit there and look at the scouting report, you almost have to draft up like 2 or 3 different things for Claire Strack because, she's probably the best center in the country next season. By the way, she can play the 4 and really give the offense a completely different look. Like she can do so many different things, and that's just offensively. She's already one of the best defenders in college basketball. So, I think Clara Strack minutes at the 4 would do a lot for Kentucky because it would be just a completely different, unorthodox look, that they kind of already do on the defensive end where it's like, oh, Clara Strack can defend your point guard at times, right? Like she can step out and defend on the perimeter, and, Kentucky, again, focuses on length and size and athleticism so much more than physicality, right? Kenny Brooks has talked about how he wants to be different defensively. That way, well, if you play Clara Strack at the 4 and really start mixing things around, throw Maisie at the 5, well, then you would really start to make Kentucky's offense be an unorthodox kind of thing. Booker T, 5-time, if you all understand that reference. Brooks does not improve the turnovers. Kentucky is going to be a middle pack in the SEC. Strack was second on the team in turnovers. Her hands also need to improve along with the upper body. So I didn't want to just sprinkle in complete positivity. Wanted to throw in some, I guess you could say negativity, but just some realism in a way. And I think this is an interesting point here from Booker T, 3057, because clearly Kentucky has had some turnover problems. I think we've seen that. And you think about Clara Strack specifically, as you said, she was second on the team in turnovers. I think the thing about Clara Strack, obviously she's not a perfect player. Like where you give, you have to take a little bit. And the main thing to know, like I think with the turnovers with Clara Strack, man, I would say 90% of it is when she gets double or triple teamed, and what can you really expect out of her from that, you know? Now, I actually don't know what Kentucky's stats looked like as far as team turnovers compared to other teams in the SEC, but I would say, man, a lot of teams turn the ball over, and, you know, like I don't think turnovers are going to be the one thing that would keep you from being a title contender or an upper echelon SEC team, right? Turnovers suck, and you need to mitigate them as much as possible. And I think you could argue if you're Kentucky, which is a team that's not actively going to try to force as many turnovers on the defensive end, you really got to try to win the turnover battle and not cause turnovers or commit them. But I think, yeah, Claire Strack could use some improvement in that department. Not all of that, I don't think, is really on her. I think even part of the Kenny Brooks offensive scheme is just like, hey, man, this is one little bad thing that we just got to kind of deal with sometimes, because on the other end of it, she's going to be an all-SEC, all-American player. So you just got to kind of deal with it at times. But I don't think turnovers are going to be the thing that would keep Kentucky, quote, middle of the pack in the SEC. I think would be an overarching thing of, well, it's just not as talented as the rest of the league. Someone's just not quite as good. But I don't think turnovers would totally be the reason for that. Though obviously you don't want to commit turnovers. And, I think she definitely could improve. You say her upper body, her hands and her upper body. I think her physicality could use some improvement, but at the end of the day, I don't think turnovers are something I'm overly worried about. Maybe you're right and I'm wrong here. I just don't think that is the thing we need to really be worried about with this team. And then we have Larry in the chat from last episode saying, can't imagine a season with just 11 players. Obviously, this was before Jemma, but point being, needs someone to relieve Clara. Also, when talking about recruits, please mention their height. McDonald is a sleeper. I'll try to keep that in mind for going forward. Obviously, with these recruits, when I say the name Halen Ayers, I guess it could just be hard to know, especially on the women's side where it's just not as covered and not as, well known. Like, who are these players? All of the ones I just talked about, though I failed to mention their heights, they're all guards. I think Jordan Palmer could be a 3, maybe a 4 in a really small offense, but for the most part, they're all guards. I think Palmer would be the tallest one, and I think she's 6'1", maybe 6'2". But those are all guards. So I did fail to mention their heights, and I apologize, Larry. But I'll try to keep that in mind going forward. I agree with you on the fact that Emily McDonald is a sleeper, because that's, again, people talk about her being a good shooter. We saw it at the McDonald's All-American game and the Sprite Jam Fest when she won the three-point contest. But I think she is someone who, still in the Rivals rankings is ranked number 36, a top 40 kid. And ESPN, I think she shot up to number 23 or something like that. But I do get the sense, kind of like you do, Larry, where I think, maybe Emily McDonald is underrated, and we're really going to see that here, and I'm really excited for that. And the point on we need someone to relieve Clara Strack, I don't disagree, and I think that could be what Kenny Brooks is doing here with this move, right, this potential offseason addition. I think if you asked, the majority of us Kentucky women's basketball fans, what do we think Kentucky's weaknesses are as the roster stands, I think that would be at the top of the list just about, right? Would be the depth at the 5 specifically. Again, I think you add someone like Mizia O'Neal, even, and you add Aisha Sivka, who wouldn't play the 5, but, could slide down to the 4, and Mizia to the 5. You can relieve Clara Strack there. She's not going to play 40 minutes per game, so you have to have ways to be useful and productive without her in there. So I think there is a world where Measy would play at the 5 while she's out. But I don't think you're wrong about how he needs someone to relieve her, and I think Kenny could be doing that. But I think for really the first time since he's been here, he has depth that we can feel really good about. Because you talk about Emily McDonald, who's a sleeper. Well, she's probably going to come off the bench, right? Savvy Swords, who I just raved about for, 10 minutes or so, would probably come off the bench if you made me guess. Ayanna Patterson, who comes from UConn, championship program, number 4 overall recruit, I think would come off the bench here. There's a lot of really good pieces you have, but I do see your point. Hey, Phoenix, I don't think we have a true backup 5. And I think Kenny Brooks could be going out and getting that. We'll have to see. Hopefully it happens. But, I can see your worry about starting a season with 11 or 12 players, especially if there is no true backup 5, it feels like. I think Kenny's done a pretty good job of, masking the weaknesses, right? With the point guard depth for years, having Asia Boone kind of be the backup point guard in a split role, right? Maybe Measy can be that with the 5, but even with the turnovers that I just talked about and some of the depth issues, I think Kenny Brooks has done a really good job of masking those and kind of mitigating them being exposed, right? So for the most part, I feel really, really good about this upcoming roster. It's not perfect, but I do feel like it's one that can contend in the SEC, especially when you consider your sleepers like Emily McDonald and Savvy Swords, Ayanna Patterson, Deanna Collins, all of those players who may not start but are quality contributors and should make Kentucky a really, really good women's basketball team. So I just wanted to thank you all for tuning into today's episode. We are at 60.9K subscribers on the KSR YouTube channel. Please, if you have not, go hit that subscribe button. It would mean a lot to me, Stephen Peak, and the rest of us here at KSR. Help us make that push for, right now, 61K, but then 65, 70K, and so on. Like this video, let us know. Are you enjoying the Kentucky women's basketball content? Are you enjoying the Memorial Memo? Let us know by liking. And, of course, go comment if you have a point to make, a complaint, or just have a question for us to answer next episode. Please go do so. We welcome it. Really encourage you all to do so. Again, thank you all for tuning in. It's been a fun one. I'm really excited for the future of Kentucky women's basketball. Feels like today is a really good day to be excited for the future. With, you bring in Jemma Amoore, which is fun. You bring in these off-season pieces, these sleepers that we've been talking about. And then Batt, right, who was hired as the athletic director at Kentucky, has the fundraising background, has worked with Kenny Brooks, and really every year since he's been an AD, just feels like, his women's basketball programs have continually gotten better and better and better with increased funding. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in to episode 69 of the Memorial Memo. Like, comment, subscribe. And again, until next time, peace out and go Cats.